Um, Good evening. So I always have a picture of my kids in the presentations that I do. And so that's Mika on the left, Gabriel in the middle, and Jesse. And when I was putting this presentation together, the brief was to give a little bit of background on my sort of journey, and to sort of talk about a little bit about lessons learned. And actually, I think about 4 years ago when I was living in Israel, I was asked to do a similar talk at a really great entrepreneurship school called Zell. At IDC. I was living in Israel at the time, and I kind of went back to that presentation, and it's on SlideShare, so if people want to see how many slides I've changed, you can go check. But you know, the theme then was sort of travels around the internet, and I've been involved in the internet now for need to remind myself, since about 1993, so about 21, 22 years. And when I started to be involved in the internet, I think the largest ISP in the UK, some of you may remember its name, it was called Demon, which Sky then ended up buying, had 5,000 subscribers, which was really big. It was the largest ISP in the UK. Today, the internet is 12% of UK GDP. So basically, in 20 years, you know, the UK, along with everywhere around the world, has been really touched by the internet. And I was very lucky to get involved. I mean, just timing as much as anything else at a very early stage. So this is me. Bless you. This is my Twitter account at Cape, and I sort of, you know, describe myself across these 5 different dimensions: husband, dad, founder, entrepreneur, and operator. And you know, the husband dad piece I've started with, and we're going to talk a little bit about the other areas. I was born in Johannesburg in South Africa, grew up in London. I went to school, as the Americans would say, at Cambridge. And then I've worked in Boston, Seattle, New York, London, and Tel Aviv. I tried to do work in Cape Town at the beginning of last year when I was there for 3 months, but it's a hard place to do work. Not because there's not stuff to do there, but it's just a hard place to do work. And I now live in London. I'm focused now on LocalGlobe, which is the new fund that I started with my dad last summer. And the other things that I'm actively involved in, Kano, which I co-founded with my cousin actually, and a friend I met in Israel 2 or 3 years ago, Comic Relief, where I'm on the board of trustees, Index, where I still sit on a number of boards that I was involved with, but I'm not day-to-day involved at Index anymore. And then I actually am I think they call it an executive fellow at LBS, so I try to spend a day a month at LBS talking to students. I do the same thing at Oxford once every 2 months, and I'm also trying to do some tutoring at the UCL Academy, which is in Swiss Cottage, and I'm involved in Seedcamp. So that's kind of what I'm doing. I thought this was sort of useful perspective. This is sort of NASDAQ, which I think is a good proxy for technology, or at least the public perception of the value of technology since when I began my career. So, you know, you can see that actually from then to now, you know, NASDAQ's, I think, increased sort of 500%. There have been some pretty big ups and downs. I mean, obviously the big up and the big down was sort of 99 to 2002. but you know, there've been some other peaks and troughs. I mean, this is around the financial crisis, and then, you know, people are panicking at the moment, but I mean, we're going to have a pretty precipitous drop to get anywhere near as low as we were between sort of 2001 and 2008. So, I mean, the thing that I've seen over the last 21 years is that the internet has just gone like this, and actually it's going to double in size just in the next 5 years. It's going to go from 3 billion people connected to the internet on smartphones to 6 billion in the next 5 years. So actually in the next 5 years we're going to see more growth than we've seen in the last 20. So I'm still very bullish on the internet, but you know, there are lots of ups and downs on this journey, and you got to be prepared for that. So I just thought I'd run through quickly what I was doing on this path. So between 93 and 95, I worked first at the Telegraph and then at Ogilvy's and WPP, effectively working inside media and marketing organizations, trying to get them to think about sort of digital or internet or interactive media or whatever it was called at the time. You know, I was lucky at the Telegraph to go meet the guys who started Netscape before they went public, and that really sort of gave me a sense of, it was the first time I'd been to the West Coast, to the Valley, and you know, walking into this office where totally nondescript, where people just were totally unaware of anyone else or anything that was going on. They were just into sort of shipping software, and you know, the software they shipped really changed the world. Certainly changed the way we access information, we shop, etc. And that was Netscape. We passed on their pre-IPO round at the Telegraph, you know, which was an easy mistake to make at the time. And then, you know, the Netscape IPO really became the moment that sort of the internet, you know, entered public consciousness. I then moved to Ogilvy's and WPP, where we were sponsors of the Media Lab at MIT. And, you know, by that stage, having spent a little bit of time in the Valley and then at the Media Lab in Boston, I sort of realized in London I was in completely the wrong place if I, bless you, wanted to be involved in this world. And I met a company called Firefly. There was a spin out that some students and their professor were taking out of the Media Lab at MIT. And the CEO, you know, the 27-year-old CEO who was at HBS, along with the sort of the 23-year-old founders who were at the Media Lab, and I was, I think, I don't know, 23, 24 at the time, the CEO said to me, you know, why are you thinking of investing in our company on behalf of WPP? Why don't you just come and join us? And I thought, yeah, I mean, why not? So I did. And I moved to Boston in February 95. I mean, I basically, you know, got lost for the next 5 years riding the first wave of the internet. And a lot of the names here don't really exist anymore, or exist in different formats. I mean, Microsoft still exists. AOL kind of exists. VeriSign kind of exists, but you know what I spent those 4 years doing is we built Firefly up in Boston. We sold it to Microsoft, and then at Microsoft, you know, I moved to Seattle, and I acquired a company on behalf of Microsoft called Link Exchange. The Link Exchange founders were some of the smartest people I've ever met. One, Alfred Lin, went on to be the co-founder of Zappos and is a partner at Sequoia. Another guy there, Scott Bannister, really conceived of GoTo.com or Overture, which was the bidding engine that Google then were inspired to develop AdWords. And, you know, just being at that sort of very early stage of the internet in Seattle, in San Francisco, gave me a really amazing sense of, you know, how some of these companies get built or evolved. And at the same time as well, I got very involved with the whole area of privacy and identity, because the product we actually made at Firefly called Passport, I don't know if anyone ever used Microsoft Passport, if anyone ever had a Hotmail account or any other Microsoft product, basically. You know, the idea was Passport, like Facebook Connect, would be your login across multiple services, and then you would show up at various places around the internet, and it would know who you are and say, you know, hi Linda, you know, here are relevant ads for you or relevant products for you, etc. And we did that at Microsoft, and we were aware that, you know, collecting personal information in the Windows registration wizard that shipped to 120 million people in 30 languages day one may cause some privacy issues. So we sort of proactively went out, we helped to create something called Trustee, you know, I spent a lot of time actually in Washington and in Brussels talking to policymakers about personally identifiable information and who should own their information, and, you know, what companies should say and do. And, you know, this sounded really important 16 years ago, but we were dealing with an internet of 250 million people. Obviously, in today's internet of 3 billion people and Snowden, you know, this is a real problem now. But, you know, I kind of got sucked into this whole policy world as well when I was at Microsoft. And then the bubble burst. And on the left, you know, and really, when I left Microsoft because I kind of felt, look, it was a really interesting company, and at that point Microsoft was the most valuable company in the world, and we were being sued by the US government for, you know, monopoly because of, you know, Windows and then Internet Explorer and all of that stuff. But we were somewhat sort of at Microsoft sequestered away from all of the craziness that was actually happening in Silicon Valley in New York and London, because, you know, Microsoft at that point was kind of immune. So I left Microsoft, and in '99 I moved to New York and started the first version of LocalGlobe, or the accelerator group, where I was doing seed investing in New York. My partners were doing it in LA, and my dad was doing it in London. And so together we started to work on these sort of seed investments. And this was a really bad time to be doing that, because, you know, the problem with seed investing is, you know, your chances of success are low. I mean, quite frankly, your chances of any startup investing, even the best investors in the world, your chances are low. So, I mean, if you look at venture data from the best funds over a 25, 30-year cycle, 62% of the capital you invest, you get a 1x or below, which means you basically don't get your money back. So just imagine taking $100, burning 62, and that's, you know, warming your hands, because that's basically early stage investing. It's all about the hits. You know, some people say it's like the music industry from that perspective, or making movies or writing books. Quite frankly, I've been doing some work with GSK. Their hit rate, you know, if you're a drugs company, you know, you have a 3% success rate. So actually a 38% success rate is pretty good when you're going for high risk and innovation. But anyway, most of what people invested in between 1999 and 2002 was a complete bust. We were lucky that we, of the 20, 30 odd companies we invested in, you know, we were seed investors in Last Minute, which did well. We were seed investors in Meetup, you know, which is still around, and it's doing well. And most luckily, we were seed investors in Blogger, which ended up being sold to Google before their IPO. Blogger was the company this guy Evan Williams started, who then went on to start Twitter and now Medium. And you know, basically Blogger saved our portfolio. And then I came back to Europe in 2002. I was living in New York around 9/11, and I'd met re-met my wife, who was living in Johannesburg at the time. I was living in New York, and you know, we compromised and decided to move to London. And so, you know, I needed a job, so I started a company, because that's kind of what I thought was a good thing to do. And it was a really bad time to start an internet company in 2002, because everyone was basically dancing on the grave of the internet. You know, all the big companies who, you know, were annoyed with these kids who'd come along and said, we're going to disrupt and destroy your business, you know, who'd raised loads of money, who'd gone public and then had crashed. Everyone was delighted within the sort of the institutional world that the internet had gone away. So basically from 2002 to 2005, it was pretty much impossible to raise money. And I'd been inspired by seeing Netflix when I was in the US, and I couldn't understand why there wasn't a version of Netflix in the UK and Europe. Sort of looked around actually initially for teams to back, didn't really find anyone, so we started one. And the idea was my dad and I, we would seed fund this business, I would run it, and then a year or two later, we'd get someone else to run it. That's more or less what happened. About 2-3 years in to Lovefilm, I hired a CEO to take over from me, a guy called Simon Carver, who did a really good job, and I moved to Skype. And you know, a lot of people said to me, why are you going from being the founder and the CEO of your company to run marketing at Skype? And you know, for me it was really obvious, because when I met Nicholas and I was introduced to him by the guy who became my partner at Index, Danny Reimer, who'd also backed me at Lovefilm, and we'd known each other since the mid-90s. I downloaded Skype, and I'd never sort of had an experience with software as I had with Skype since downloading Netscape for the first time. And it was just like, oh my God, I mean, this is just game changing. And, you know, while I had a company to run, you know, it was clear to me that if I could be involved in some way with Skype, and initially that was just as an advisor meeting Nicholas like once a month, I would want to do that, because to me this was the first time I'd seen a business outside of Silicon Valley that had the ability to scale worldwide and to have a global impact. And you know, pretty soon after joining Skype full time, we sold the company to eBay for $4.2 billion, which was, you know, a big number at the time, and in Europe it was a huge number. But actually kind of felt it was a bit of a shame, because I mean, I sort of felt that Skype could have been, you know, a Vodafone scale business. I mean, we were a global operator with, you know, no real fixed costs, which is just, you know, we were obviously going to destroy their businesses over time. So, you know, it was a great exit, but it also sort of was bittersweet from my perspective, because I just thought this could have been so much bigger. I also, at the time, started to do some angel investing or seed investing, so Last.fm, Moo, Mind Candy. And then in 2007, having sold, you know, Skype to eBay, done a sort of a year at eBay, which was about as much as I could bear of being inside a big company again. Although it's a great company and I learned a lot from people at eBay. I joined Index, and the first thing I did at Index was to start Seedcamp, which was about 8 years ago. And I started Seedcamp because I felt there was no avenue for first-time entrepreneurs in Europe to actually get a start. So I was lucky, when I came back to Europe, I had a network, I had experience in the US, I knew investors, I had a sort of a track record, but I thought, if you're a first-time entrepreneur in Cambridge, in Paris, in Bristol, what are you going to do? So, that was the original idea behind Seedcamp. I met my co-founder, Reshma, and she's really, first her and then Carlos, sort of built Seedcamp into an organization that's now funded over 200 businesses, including TransferWise. So that's been a great journey. And then, if Skype gave you a sense that Europe could really scale, what I saw in my time at Index, that Europe can really scale. So these are all companies, hopefully you've heard of most of them, that we were, early stage investors in, either at Index or at LocalGlobe. And, some of these businesses, King sold for $6 billion, ASOS been public for many years, over $1 billion, Zoopla over $1 billion, Just Eat's, I think a $3-4 billion company, etc. So, the point here really is that there is no sense anymore that you have to be in the Valley to build a really big, impactful tech company. The Valley is still decades ahead, and they're building $100 billion companies or $500 billion companies like Google, but we can build $5 or $10 billion companies now in Europe regularly, and we do. And that's changed. So this is from 2011, from when I gave this talk in Tel Aviv, and the protester was the person of the year. I guess Lady Gaga was winning at the Grammys, Lionel Messi won the Ballon d'Or, and those were sort of, at that time, the 8 big themes that I felt, were sort of important. Global internet, local services, broadband everywhere, mobile devices, cloud computing, e-commerce, social graph, consumerization of IT, the low cost of startups. I look at that list today, and the only one I have any sort of doubts about is e-commerce, and I still think e-commerce is huge. It's just sort of changed from being, more about being in the transaction flow in marketplaces than sort of, selling and shipping stuff to people. So, that was sort of 4 or 5 years ago, and I think all of that sticks. And then, when I was sort of updating it, I think all of that still sticks, and then there are 9 more things. The first 4, which are literally like Groundhog Day. So marketplaces, eBay is a marketplace, 95. So we think we've discovered marketplaces in the last few years. That the reason why eBay was once the most valuable internet company is because it was a marketplace model. SaaS in the late 90s used to be called ASPs, application service providers. I don't know if anyone remembers that, but the notion that you could host software remotely and sell it on a monthly basis, it's not rocket science, it's just a new name, and better cloud connectivity, more broadband, and better billing systems makes that real. Messaging and bots, if anyone remembers AIM. Did anyone ever use AIM? In the late 90s, when AIM and ICQ were the 2 biggest messaging platforms, there were loads of bots. Loads. In Firefly, we used to have a chat bot in 94 where you'd go into a chat room and you'd say, I like Portishead, and the bot would say, well, if you like Portishead, you should try Tricky. So anyone knows the sort of the Bristol trip hop scene will understand that. why the bot was actually intelligent. But the notion that you could talk to a computer and it would respond back intelligently is like a 20-year-old idea. Security and privacy, as I mentioned, I mean, that's just about scale and complexity. The issues were always there. And then, we've got stuff like the sharing and the on-demand economy. I mean, I do think, Airbnb, Uber, those are genuinely new phenomena in the last 4 years and fundamental and transformational. I think digital transformation, period, will hit every single part of our lives. Schools, hospitals, transportation, energy, government. I mean, all of this stuff was sort of theoretical. It's going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years. Zebras, this is sort of a term that I use for people who want to be entrepreneurs, who want to be self-employed, people earning money as entrepreneurs on the Uber platform, on the Deliveroo platform, earning extra wages, paying for further education, people making artisan products on Etsy, people, paying their way in their creative careers on Patreon, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then, what a friend of mine at Union Square Ventures, Andy Weissman, calls the nomad stack. The notion that, nowadays with services like Uber, Airbnb, and other new services, we can really pretty much go anywhere in the world, show up, and you've got housing, you've got transportation, you've got finance, Revolut and TransferWise are products that sort of play in the finance space. We've recently invested in a company with Union Square in Estonia that addresses the employment area of that. So you can show up or you can go to Jakarta for 3 months or 6 months and work as well. So I think, this notion of the nomad stack, of the different services that sort of facilitate, freedom of movement. Obviously there are security and visa issues with that stuff, but this exists. And then we've got drones, connected cars, robots, blockchains, microservices. I'm not going to go into that. And again, this is an old slide, 2011. I still stand by this slide. The term I used was sort of Maslow's web, that the first phase of the internet, 93 to 2003, was sort of discretionary. All stuff we can do without, media, entertainment, shopping, travel. We can still live and not do any of those things. And then from about 2004 with Skype, and then with fashion, which people, it's just another name for clothes. We actually need those, but it's kind of been rebranded as fashion. You can see that I just wear clothes. But, that was sort of the beginning of the journey to the world we're now in, where, the really big sectors like food, finance, health, education, housing, all of these are going to go through massive disruption, and all of these are much bigger industries than any of those. So again, that's why I think the future is going to be way more exciting than the past. And then just to sort of give you a sense from the investor point of view, a very smart guy, one of the founding partners of Benchmark, which is probably other than Index, the venture firm that I would respect the most, said that basically, which I think is absolutely right, you don't spot waves in our business. Like, everyone knows the waves, these ones, everyone knows that. And by the way, if they're big enough, everyone can see them. And that's why on any interesting wave, you got 50 or 100 companies. So really what you're looking to do as an investor, I think, is not say, oh, AI, it's really big, or big data, or IoT, or whatever the hell it is. You're basically trying to say, you're picking surfers. Like, who is actually going to have that 38% chance of getting it to the end of the wave, because you know at least 6 out of 10 are going to crash. At least 6 out of 10. This is what I think investors look for, and I think we're going to have time for questions. Maybe we can discuss this or whatever else you want to discuss. Baseline, investors want to back ideas that can return their fund, and so you need to know what that means. And what that means is you need to know how big is the fund that the investor is investing out of. And in the case of LocalGlobe, which is the new seed fund we started last summer, it's a £45 million seed fund focused on London, which is tiny by index standards. Index announced today they raised $1 billion and 1.25 billion of new capital to invest. So 70 million focused on London is really small. But at the end of the day, the calculation as an investor you're making is, if I have 10% of your business and I can hold on to that stake at exit, your business, to return my fund, needs to be worth 450 million quid at exit, about 700 million. So like, if I can't see that, I don't want to invest. In fact, if you can't see it and persuade me that you can see it, I don't want to invest. So that is the mental calculation every investor is or should be going through when they're looking at an opportunity. Can this one investment return my fund, even though I'm going to make 30 or 40 investments in my fund? And what do you want to see? You want to see, obviously, talented founders who've got ideas capable of changing industries, and you want to see them, in our case, as early as possible. You want to see Lorde, while she's still in New Zealand, writing songs in her bedroom, putting them up on SoundCloud. You want to see, can the founding team visualize the biggest possible outcome? So if I asked you, okay, fine, how's your business going to be worth 700 million? You need to be able to visualize that. And you need to be able to persuade me that although we're standing here and that's over there, that some of what it's going to take to get there. Because if you can't believe that, there's no way I can believe that. And then, what you want to do as an investor is provide, obviously, the capital and then the support that the founders need to have the best possible chance of success in every stage of their journey. So we're doing that at Seed, and we're trying to help people get to the best possible Series A with an Index, an Accel, a Sequoia, an Andreessen, etc. And then, if you're going to Index or if you're going to Balderson, they're trying to get you to the next stage where, they want a DST or whoever to do it, and on to an IPO. So, if you've got a startup or you've got an idea, what makes a good idea? So these are sort of the things that really stick out for me. Number one, does it pass the 10-year test personally and professionally? It will take at least 10 years, for an idea to become something that has enormous value or impact. And if you can't imagine doing that in 10 years' time, you probably shouldn't start. So, anyone who's like, oh, the market's really hot, I can sell this to Microsoft, not interested. You shouldn't be interested. There's so much, there's a very wise man over here. He's going to get annoyed, but if I'll give you his Twitter handle, and you can go and watch one of his YouTube videos. But Sully Breaks. You don't have to be Mark Zuckerberg to have an impact on the world. You can have an impact in your community. You can have an impact on your family. You don't have to be an entrepreneur, or the sort of the mythology around an entrepreneur. So if you're going to go on this crazy journey, make sure it's worth doing. You know, make sure you can visualize what success looks like. And, you know, is this going to have a real social or economic impact? You have to think through this stuff. Then you've got to build a team, you know, get the right balance of skills and temperaments. You know, the best team isn't all of your friends who all went to business school with you or all did computer science with you. There's a designer, there's a developer, there's a growth person, there's an operations person, and they have different skills and they have different temperaments. You know, otherwise you have the inevitability of the band breaking up, you know, well documented in the social network. You know, what are the cultures? You know, what are the values? It's never too early to start this. The values, not just values, but the behaviors. Values translate into behaviors. What's acceptable? What's not acceptable? What kind of organization do you want to have? You know, and also sort of maximizing the alignment of interest, not just within the team, but with investors, with customers. And then I think this is something that's really important, especially in markets like London or the Valley, where the competition for talent is so fierce. Like, why should I join your company when there are 10 other companies I could join, or 50 other companies I could join? Never mind, you know, I could go and work at Google or Facebook or Twitter or Amazon or Dropbox or Uber or, you know, any of those companies. So you got to really tell me, you know, what your talent brand is. You know, what are the big challenges I'm going to come into work and deal with every day? You know, who are the people I'm going to be working with? Are they going to be smart? Are they going to be inspiring? Am I going to have autonomy? Do I get accountability? So all of these things, when you're building, you know, a team of superstars, are really, really important. And then, you know, there is no excuse nowadays not to have a prototype of your product. And going about the product you build in the right way, you know, like getting customer insights. You know, what are the macro conditions of the market you're looking at? You know, what is the market? Have you spoken to prospective customers? What qualitative research do you have? And then make something. You know, it can be a demo, it can be a 3D rendering, you can do custom manufacturing. All of this you can do for less than £5,000 or dollars. And if you're not prepared to do that, when all of the tools are available to you, either free or at low cost, why should I be interested, or any investor, in what, you know, if all you can do is a PowerPoint presentation? It's like, you know, anyone can do that. You know, make something, and then, you know, show investors that you can refine what you've made based on feedback. You know, then you can build a roadmap and a basic budget. So you've got a sense of like, okay, I've made something, I've got feedback, I know who I'm selling to, and I've got a sense of what the next 18 months look like. And then, you know, you got to start selling it. So, you know, talk to customers. They may not be paying you money yet, but they should be telling you why they need this, or why they don't need this, or what needs to change for them to need this. Same with distribution partners. Have you persuaded anyone to join your mission? I mean, hiring is one of the key sales jobs that any founder needs to do. And, you know, just persuading people that what you're doing is interesting enough to leave their job and go do something else, that's huge. Start to meet smart investors, not to raise money, but to get feedback, understand what their fund dynamics are like, you know, what value they could add for you, how much they know your market, can they help you with initial customers? Investors should work for you. So you should know what you want them to do and what kind of feedback you want. And then, although this probably comes last, I think, you know, this can be and should be done early, is that even if you're not doing it formally, informally, educating key media and policymakers can also be very important. So, I mean, here's the good news. You know, the UK, which, you know, we all like to bitch and moan about, or at least I do, is actually the top of the G20 in terms of the internet's contribution to our economy. It's and by a wide margin. In fact, it's sort of more than 2 times more important in our economy than it is in the US. So I mean, the good news is that you're actually in a pretty good place to succeed in this world if you want to be in this world. Surprisingly, and I hate to say it, because, you know, I think institutionally most large institutions get technology wrong. You know, the UK is a global thought leader in digital transformation. The government digital service, which a lot of you probably use, I mean, just in the last 2 or 3 years has gone from 600 different websites to one website where, you know, when I was in South Africa earlier this year, it took me 3 minutes to basically register to vote. Or, you know, if you paid your taxes in the last few weeks, I mean, how long did that take? Like 5 minutes? I mean, so it's pretty amazing what the government's done. Also, we're world leaders in open data, using open source. We're the first country in the G8 to make coding mandatory in schools from the age of 5 up. And the other thing that the government's doing is it's using its massive procurement budget to basically open up 25% of that government IT budget. And that IT budget used to be £16 billion a year, which is just nuts, to startups. So there's a lot going on actually from the government side. And London now, you know, from the earliest phases, Seedcamp, Entrepreneur First, through to sort of Series A+, Index, Accel, Balderton, Atomico, then up to the next level, DST, which is Yuri Milner's fund that have invested in, just in the last year, in Farfetch, in Funding Circle, and in Deliveroo, and Vitruvian, and then, you know, a level above you've got Silver Lake, and then, you know, the stock exchange. I mean, London is basically now Sandhill Road for EMEA. And it's just getting started. If anyone hasn't been in and around the King's Cross area, so this is Central St Martin's, that school a bit up there, which is the biggest sort of design school in the world. Right next to that red thing, which is going to be Google's 5,000 person campus, right by St Pancras. So you've got Paris 3 hours away, you've got Cambridge 45 minutes away, you know, you've got the Guardian here, you've got the British Library here, you've got the Crick Institute, which will be the biggest centre in Europe for genomics there as well. So, I mean, there's infrastructure that's being built, which in the next 5 years will just, you know, if we think Shoreditch is interesting, it's going to be nothing compared to that. Which is why we're sort of trying to site ourselves in and around this area, because I think Camden, of which LBS is a tenant, is a great place to be. So, I mean, I think the moral of the story is sort of, you know, the sky's the limit here. You know, if you want to be in this world, you've got no excuses. And that's my family again. So that's it. So we got time for some questions. I think if people have any questions, yeah, you're going to tell me why your business is worth 700 million. No. Okay.
First, thank you. That was a fascinating story. When you did the 2011-2016 slide, I sensed a little bit of disappointment. And I wanted, my first question that I wrote down was, why did Passport disappear? Because I used MSN Messenger to communicate with my family across the world. And it was, you know, the center of my life for a good half a decade. But, you know, a lot of the things haven't changed. We haven't, you know, someone said, where's my hoverboard or my flying car? Why has tech not
Peter
really,
Thiel, I think, yeah.
Why has it not really got there, in your opinion?
Well, I think, you know, one thing is that things take a long time to change. So, you know, the long tail of technology adoption is enormous. I mean, you know, vinyl is making a resurgence, you know, CDs, I think Adele sold, you know, a truckload of CDs. You know, my wife still likes CDs. I think VHS we've got beyond, but so I think there's a long tail on adoption. The other thing is that, you know, a lot of this is to do with timing, and you know, while Passport made sense, Facebook Connect makes more sense, right? Because the key thing that we didn't figure out, or we didn't have the ability to do first as Firefly and then at Microsoft, is because Microsoft doesn't really think about consumers, they think about platforms, is that if you want a ubiquitous identity product, it needs to be the byproduct of something else that people are using, like a social network. And then if you got 300-400 million people on the social network, and all of a sudden you say, oh, you know, when you log into blah, you can use the same credentials, people are like, thanks. You know, so I think there's part of it's that, but you know, I kind of learned not to look in the rearview mirror, basically. Just so much interesting stuff ahead. Yep.
You mentioned origination and trying to get startups at the very earliest stages. How are venture capitalists adapting to the modern world and finding those deals these days?
It's never any trouble finding entrepreneurs who want money. The trouble is picking the right ones. Bless you. So, yeah, I mean, I think if anything, the emergence of platforms like Seedcamp, Y Combinator, Entrepreneur First, Kickstarter, where we raise money for Kano, we raise $1.5 million on Kickstarter. You know, that just makes the signal more visible to investors. So angel list, all of that stuff is just really helpful, quite frankly. So app stores, you know, with rankings, you know, all of the, you know, before you meet a company, you know a lot about them. I mean, at Index, and I think a lot of other places, we had a data scientist who, you know, was writing all sorts of crawlers and algorithms, sort of looking to identify signal from the noise. But, you know, generally, you know, what you're doing is the meetings you take are typically, you know, come from a warm introduction from someone you know or you trust. It's like, I don't know how many artists got signed by, you know, putting their demo tape on the reception at EMI, or scripts got greenlit by going onto the lot at, you know, in Burbank. It's no different. There are always going to be way more ideas than smart capital. I mean, which is why I would sort of very happily say there could be half as much funding in Europe or the US at every level, and there'd still be too much money chasing too few big ideas. So I think the real challenge is, like, you know, finding people like this, you know. Yeah.
As a follow-on to that, your family is obviously very important to you. How do you square that up with being an entrepreneur working 7 days a week, 18 hours a day?
Well, I don't work 7 days a week because my wife very wisely reminded me, you know, we're Jewish, that there's like this smart thing called Shabbat. So like 1 day a week, actually, you're not meant to do any work. So I've sort of adopted that as lifestyle Shabbat. So, you know, I don't do email, don't talk on the phone, try not to drive. And I just find that, and have done for like 10 years or more, a really great way of just sort of checking out. And I think it's really important, however you do it, to create space in your week, whether you have a family or not. I think it's just good for, you know, the way you think and the way you behave and the way you are with other people. But I think obviously when you have responsibilities like a partner or kids or etc., you know, you kind of, that's the situation. So you have to accommodate that. But I think, you know, you just have to make time to do that. And, you know, again, that comes down to sort of, you know, values and behaviors is, you know, that's you got to figure out what's important to you. And I don't think, you know, being an entrepreneur and having a family are mutually exclusive. I mean, it's definitely, I think, one of the reasons why you get a lot of entrepreneurs who, you know, take off in their 20s is because you don't have a lot of the things that sort of may make you less able to take risks, like, you know, partner, kids, mortgage, etc. But actually, you know, having a partner can make it easier to take risks because, you know, your partner encourages you to do that. And, you know, I've certainly, you know, I'm very lucky to not only have that relationship with, you know, my wife, but also, you know, my dad was an entrepreneur. So I was lucky. I grew up in a family where, you know, the idea that I could say, oh, I'm leaving my job at WPP and I'm going to move to Boston to sort of, you know, help start a company with 6 people out of the Media Lab. You know, my parents were like, great. I mean, go for it. So I don't think they're incompatible, but you've got to know what value system you want to operate within. Yep.
And you mentioned that the UK government has been a global thought leader in this area, and I was just wondering whether you thought that they could be doing anything else or anything more in terms of regulation or in terms of how
Well, definitely not more in terms of regulation. But
to support entrepreneurs on their journey.
I think there's lots, but I mean, generally, they're doing a pretty good job. And, you know, if we're in a situation where we need the government to do the work for us, we're screwed. So I think they're fine. I mean, you know, I like the fact that they're ambitious. I like the fact that they see this as a sort of an economic opportunity for the UK, that, you know, they recognize that tech creates jobs, generates revenue. They got to figure out how to get the Americans to pay their taxes, but, you know, that's their problem. There's a long-running debate between the Americans and the Brits on taxes. They'll figure it out. Yeah.
Sorry, yeah, I'm intrigued to see whether you feel over time what makes a successful founder entrepreneur has actually changed inherently, or is it common over the evolution of the internet? You know, behaviours, backgrounds.
I don't know. I mean, I think the sort of the fundamentals probably haven't changed that much. I mean, Steve Jobs started Apple in his early 20s. Michael Dell started Dell, you know, at university. Bill Gates started, you know, so the notion of 20-something entrepreneurs starting big tech companies, again, it's not new. I mean, this was happening in the 70s and the 80s. So I don't think that's changed. I think, you know, one thing that has changed environmentally, which is important, and why I think London is potentially has advantages going forward, is I think nowadays, because the internet is so global, I mean, the US, UK, France and Germany are 14% of the global internet. It's like,
Sorry, as in high or low?
that's nothing,
Yeah.
right? I mean, when this started, it was 95% of the global internet. So, you know, quite frankly, if you don't understand what's going on in Africa, in India, in China, or you don't care, which a lot of American CEOs think of as a sort of a second or third thought, I actually think, you know, the sort of the global and international nature of business now is potentially advantageous for Europeans. And I think that has changed. The best entrepreneurs in the US, like, you know, the guys at Uber get that. They're in 300 cities in 4 years. But I do think that's a sort of a little bit of a mindset switch, because the US is just so insular, because its home market is so huge and it's sort of a hermetically sealed sort of culture.
You were talking about the waves and surfers kind of analogy. All those waves that are kind of, let's say, frontier technologies, things like AI or even more relevant, I guess, blockchain. At what point do you time that wave? So, you know, to your point around building a business that has to return the fund. I'm an early seed investor, so I have the same challenge. How do I identify a blockchain business given it's such a nascent sector, given the dependency on regulation and
I see.
everything else. What are those market signals or tactics you employ to time when to?
I don't think they're market signals. They're entrepreneurial signals.
Okay.
So the two things we look for is, number one, can this investment at scale return the fund? Number two is, do we think this entrepreneur could raise tier 1 Series A? So actually, sort of the most important second dimension is the person. And obviously, having sat in 500 investment committee meetings at a tier 1 Series A, I've got a sense of what that's like. But that's why Andy Radcliffe from Benchmark, I think, was so insightful that and it's not just about the wave, and it does, quite frankly, you can join the wave 3 years in, but if your timing is right, you're going to win. I mean, arguably, Google joined the surf wave so late that people thought it had finished. So I think that the person is really, it's just so key. So you can't time markets, I think, or at least I don't think any investor is smart enough to time markets. Yep.
You mentioned earlier that you try to set something up in Cape Town.
Yeah.
Curious to hear what your thoughts were around the specific challenges, whether that applies in Africa in general.
Look, I think South Africa, Kenya, and Nigeria, there's a lot of really amazing stuff going on. Actually, we invested last year in a company in Kenya that's doing off-grid solar using M-Pesa as the sort of mobile payments infrastructure. So I think there are huge opportunities in Africa. And I think Nigeria is going to be the 4th largest country in the world by between 2030 and 2050. So, I mean, I'm all in on Africa. It's just a timing thing. And, we're just, I'm in South Africa often because of family. So I'm just really learning and seeing what's going on. Amazon's got a big office in Cape Town, for example. Google and Facebook take Africa very, very seriously. So I think, there's, putting aside politics, war, famine, disease, etc., which we kind of get everywhere. They're really big, interesting opportunities in Africa. But it's an incredible, if London or Europe today is where Silicon Valley was in the late 80s, Africa is not even there yet. I mean, it's Silicon Valley in the 60s. Pre-Fairchild Semiconductor, pre-Intel. It's going to happen, but it's not for the faint of heart. And I think one of the challenges is a lot of people go to Africa and they go to Asia and they take models that they think work in the US or in Europe and they try to replicate those models. And I think, that's a recipe for disaster because, first of all, local conditions are fundamentally different. Secondly, when those models, were created, we weren't living in a world of the mobile. And finally, there are much bigger challenges in Africa than shopping and entertainment. The challenges in Africa are sort of energy, finance, housing, safety, and those needs, solutions like M-Pesa that are sort of, built from the ground up, understanding the environment. So, what annoys me is that there are too many entrepreneurs in those markets who are like bringing sort of the Just Eat of Cape Town or the Netflix of Lagos. It's like, whatever. Yeah.
You mentioned about looking for moonshots. To take a sort of music parallel, outside One Direction, there's lots of other music being made. Because of the mathematics, you're looking for the One Directions, I guess. What about those other companies, which is like Google's still a small part of the economy of the world. There's lots of small companies, medium companies, $10 million companies.
They're not for venture.
Yeah, direction stuff.
I don't know if everyone does, but that's what venture wants. So, and it's not, venture and this journey is not right for everyone. I think, you know, a lot of people have sort of persuaded themselves that that's the only way. You know, there are lots of other alternatives that are fantastic, you know, for people who just want to earn a good living. You know, and I think actually, you know, more than ever before, if you have skills, there are platforms that will allow you to earn a good living. You know, you're not going to necessarily be the next Richard Branson or Mark Zuckerberg, but so what? But, you know, there's venture, and that's a very particular thing. But it doesn't apply to everyone. And quite frankly, you know, not only is sort of one direction rare, I would argue, I don't want to invest in one direction. I want to invest in U2 or Bob Marley. You know, one direction is sort of like Groupon. Guy right at the back. You, yeah.
So I'm working on a startup.
Can you talk louder?
I'm working on a startup idea called Art Browser. It's pretty much like a Tinder-style marketplace for browsing art. So I'm looking to raise some seed investment.
You got a big crowd here, yeah.
So how much of a factor are things like SEIS and EIS really, like from an investor's point of view? Do they really make a big difference?
I mean, for a venture investor, they make no difference. For an angel investor, it makes a big difference because they get to write off 50% of their tax. But again, you have to ask yourself, if someone is investing in your company because it's a tax write-off, does that make them the kind of investor you want? Or is someone investing in your company because the first part of your sentence was the contemporary art market is $50 billion globally and I'm going to help people, you know, so you didn't sell me the visualization. You just asked me, you know, is it a tax dodge? Okay. Yeah.
What are you doing with GSK?
You know, they have a data advisory board, so they're looking at, you know, how they use data. But also, you know, my former colleagues at Index, you know, GSK and J&J were the anchor investors in our life science fund. So, you know, we used to work a lot with them. And I think, you know, they, like J&J and others, are quite interesting in terms of how they're trying to engage with the early stage, at least life science community, to sort of be more open to open innovation, I think the term is. Yeah.
What do you think are the 2 or 3 big constraints for European companies that are trying to get from seed to Series A?
I think the capital is there. So, I mean, even in the last 2 or 3 years in London, and there's a lot more seed capital, sort of what I would call institutional seed capital available. So other than us, there's Hoxton, Episode 1, White Star, Playfair, Connect, etc. I'm probably leaving some people out. All really great early stage funds and new funds coming. And then at the Series A, there's obviously Index, Accel, Balderton, you know, Atomico. You've now got Felix, you've got Mosaic, you've got the British Growth Fund. I mean, there's sort of a list, you know, never mind Point 9 and Union Square, and, you know, so I think there's lots of capital. One of the, I'd say that sort of the biggest challenges I think a lot of European and Israeli entrepreneurs have is, like, they're literally not very good at telling their story. And people really underestimate how important the narrative is. You know, they say, I've got the best technology and I've got the most patents and I've got the smartest team, and, you know, great, everyone has now, but, you know, tell it to me in a way where I can visualize the outcome. And, you know, the best entrepreneurs anywhere are brilliant at doing that. Certainly in the Valley, they are incredible at doing that. To the extent where actually the substance of UK or European or Israeli companies is often far superior, but it doesn't really matter because the other guys have raised more money and they'll be riding the wave for longer because they can afford to. Yep.
Hi, my name is Yao. I'm founder of a music messaging startup called Yuwa. We've just been celebrated by Telefonica. So we're in the stage of we're doing our first fundraise and we're looking for a lead investor. What would your advice be and when selecting a lead investor? What sort of key attributes or what are the tick boxes?
I mean, I just sort of, I'll put this up on slideshow, I'd sort of refer you to this. It's like, you know, first of all, make sure you've got enough time to meet the right investors. So, you know, a lot of people don't give themselves enough time to do that. And, you know, if you're a founder or you're a CEO, you probably have to carve out 20-25% of your time, even from like the very early days, to meeting investors, not pitching them to raise money, because investors hate that. It's like, you know, asking them for advice and input and making them feel smart. It's like, you know, romance. But I think you've got to spend enough time, and, you know, ultimately you're embarking on a long-term relationship with someone, so you got to get them to fall in love with you, and they got to fall in love with the size of the, you know, like all this stuff. They got to emotionally fall in love with the opportunity, the product, the team, you know, your vision, and then rationally, you know, they've got to be able to say, okay, fine, you know, music messaging company, you know, size of my fund, I'm going to get 10%, maybe 15%. Can I see this being worth, or can you persuade me that this is going to be worth $500 million, like legitimately? So, you know, I think you just, that takes time, but, you know, people have to sort of see more than just passion. You know, they have to see logic as well, but they need to see both.
So if you have a second for passion and logic,
You asking me for a date in front of all these people?
I wonder, do you agree with Peter Thiel's opinion that entrepreneurs and investors aren't going for the big enough ideas? And kind of related, what you think about the productivity issues in the UK and whether technology is currently in a period where we're going to address that, or if it's more of the same kind of growth that we've seen for the last 30 years?
Well, on the first point, yeah, I agree, and I also think it's a really smart marketing point of his, because, you know, he's saying what he wants to see, which we all want to see. You know, we want to see more ambitious entrepreneurs, and by saying investors aren't particularly ambitious, he's saying, but I am. So he's a pretty smart guy. On the second point, I have no idea. I'm not an economist. I have no idea. I mean, my gut tells me that there are huge productivity gains, you know, from technology and the smart application of technology. On the upside, on the downside, there are going to be massive job losses, and, you know, we need to have, you know, huge amounts of sort of education in place to sort of retrain people for all of the new jobs that will be available. So I don't think jobs get destroyed. I think new jobs get created, but we do need to help people prepare for that world, because it's happened, it's not even coming. Yep.
When you're picking surfers, would you rather invest in a big idea or someone who says I can out-execute, I'm faster? Maybe some European startups that are saying we'll take the idea from there and do it in Africa or Europe, but faster and grow it better.
Well, the market has to be big, otherwise whatever the founder says, I mean, if it's a tiny market, they can kill it, but it's never going to be a really big company. So I mean, the market has to be big, the product has to be engaging, the team has to be excellent. I mean, all of those things are sort of, you take as a given. And then it's a question of, you know, do you believe, do you have conviction in this person? And I don't know, that's an intangible. Yeah, it's, you know, it's chemistry, it's trust, there's no sort of science to that, I think. Yeah.
If you were starting, or if you're
By the way, sorry, we're 5 minutes over. I mean, I'm happy to keep talking, but if people want to go, feel free, I won't be offended.
if you were the CEO of a Series A or a C startup today, what advice would you give yourself, or what advice would you give your portfolio companies? Like, what are the
Today, I mean, the first advice is always, you know, make sure you've got enough. You've got like 18 to 24 months runway. And either do that because you've been able to raise the capital, or you're going to have to cut your burn, or you're going to have to move closer to, you know, profitable unit economics. So, you know, I think we always want people to have 18 to 24 months of runway. I mean, when we think about making seed investments, we don't sort of say, we write seed investments checks of X. We say to the company, show us your plan for 18 to 24 months of revenue-free runway, and that's how we work out how much to raise. It's kind of obvious. It's like, work out how much you need, and then try and raise it. And if you can't, spend less money. Yeah.
What about A to B?
Sorry?
What about the same question?
Same question. Same. Always. C to D. Pre-IPO to IPO. It's like, you've got to have enough money to prosecute the plan that you want. And if you don't have enough money, you have a plan B, which is cut heads or, you know, manage costs. Yeah, I mean, that's a business school class, right? I think you, yeah, anyone else? Okay.
You have been on both sides. You have been the founder as well as you have been the investor. And both sort of need each other, but some of the founders are able to make that a win-win relationship. Like other times it's not always possible, example with technology. So what have you seen in the founders who are able to sort of make it as a win-win and do not get themselves wiped out at the end?
Sorry, I didn't catch the last thing you said after win-win.
Basically, what have you seen in the founders who are able to sort of make it win-win and don't get themselves wiped out at the end? For example, in good technology, 435 million sale, but the founders and employees were wiped out.
I mean, I think it all comes down to alignment of interests. If you see your investor as money, then, you know, they'll act and behave as money. If you see your team as staff or employees, you know, they'll act like staff and employees. So I think you've got to create a culture and a value system where, you know, you maximize everything for alignment of interests. I mean, in terms of, you know, companies like, I don't know all of the background of good technology, but you know, I made this mistake at Lovefilm in our Series B. I raised money at too high a valuation, and I knew it was too high, and I spent the next 12, 18 months paying for it because the investor who came in made sure that every single month when we missed our numbers by 5% or 10% or like 50% or whatever it was, you know, like, you know, he made me feel like, you know, I got a bad deal. So I would just say in all cases, it's like, if you want to create win-win, then you create win-win. And, you know, if you take money at a high valuation and, you know, a lot of these unicorns, anyone know which film this is from?
Blade Runner.
Nice. Okay.
Director's cut.
Is it only in the director's cut? Really? Okay. is when basically people were shooting for this billion-dollar valuation, which therefore made it easier to recruit staff or whatever they were doing, but they were basically putting the whole company under a preference stack of 50, 100, 200 million, effectively meaning that if the company didn't sell for a certain amount, every employee's stock was worthless, more or less the founder's stock was worthless. If you make that trade, you are sacrificing the interests of everyone who got you to the point that you arrived at. So, honestly, I don't have any sympathy. I know you've asked the question, sorry.
I'm just wondering, just now you mentioned the importance of picking surfers.
Sorry, can you speak up a bit?
Just now you mentioned the importance of picking surfers.
Yeah.
Your experience in investing, could you distill some of the qualities that you think kind of help you distill who will be the surfers who survive?
No, I mean, I don't think there's anything sort of novel here. It's like, tenacity, self-belief, I mean, all of this kind of stuff. But, when you meet someone who is going to get to that 10-year goal, whether you believe them or not, and they actually on some level don't care what you think. I mean, James Dyson is the great example of this. He entered a category that was so generic, the main product, Hoover, like, what the hell are you doing? I mean, the product, the market leader is a generic. And he's like, no, there's a better way to build a vacuum cleaner. And he built 50, 100 prototypes. Everyone thought he was an idiot. But, that entrepreneur, if you can find them, you want to back, because they don't actually care whether you believe them or not. They're just going to do it anyway.
Let's do one more.
Yeah.
You mentioned there's a big data analyst working at Index Ventures. I wonder if you have any shareable insights he's been able to find.
I mean, it's an experiment that we started about 3 or 4 years ago, and we saw obviously how much data there is out there, and are we missing stuff that we couldn't possibly cover with human beings? And I'm not sure we've actually ended up investing or in anything that we wouldn't have seen. The key learning, I think, because this is the second data scientist, is that in the first iteration, it was sort of a data scientist and the investment team. In the second iteration, he's actually a member of the investment team. He just does his sourcing through data rather than going out and sort of meet and greet networking. So I think the key learning was just there are 2 different ways to do sourcing. You can use data, you can use human interaction, and sort of don't relegate it as a resource for the investment team. Make this person sort of a full member of the investment team, and I think it has worked a lot better that way. And there's definitely things that have sort of pop up on the radar screen, some of which may have been things that we've invested in. I know Google, obviously with Google Ventures, takes this very, very seriously. I mean, they even have an algorithm at the investment committee, which I think is kind of a weird culture to be part of, but whatever.
Cool. So thank you, everyone. Let's quickly join Saul. Round of applause.